Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, my name's Kit, and this is my world. Thank you very much for joining me. In this special episode, I'm going to be reviewing a book, The Mating Habits of Stags by Ray Robinson. Yes, an actual proper book, contemporary literary fiction. It's not my normal wheelhouse, and for that reason I thought I'd bring on a bit of help, just to give me more gravitas and someone to hold my hand. So I invited my good friend Jere from Drawn to Stories to help me discuss this book and hopefully give some credibility to my rather strong opinions about it. When I saw Shawn talking about this book, I was convinced it was the book for me. It seemed, the first video, the first time he described it, before he'd actually fucking read it.
Yeah, I think it was Mail Hall or something like he had read a few pages from the beginning.
Just enough to sell it. And he made it sound very beautiful and very lyrical. And it was bucolic, all the stuff I like. It was describing the English countryside and rural life. I couldn't have been more excited to read the book. So I fully blame Shawn for the misery that ensued when I finally found myself ploughing through the thicket, because it could have been so good. It was written by an author who understood what he was talking about. He knows the countryside. He clearly knows the countryside. He knows farming. He knows animal husbandry. And all of this stuff is in there, but in the form of nouns and adjectives separated by commas, mostly in the present tense. And it drove me crazy. It was like torture, because there was a story in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I just wanted him to tell me a story. And I struggled with the tenses. I don't like present tense almost ever. It's very rare for me to like anything written in the present tense. But what I can't bear is when it bounces between the tenses, when it's present tense and then it goes into past tense, and we're in the past tense now, and you start to get into it and you start to get caught up in the story, and suddenly it lurches back into present tense again. And also I just didn't care about the central character, Jake. I think you liked him more than I did.
Yeah, I like him a bit more. Like, I find him quite sympathetic character. Like, he's trying to grow up a son who turns out is not his son. So I think that takes a lot of character. So in a way, I could feel his pain, and then eventually all of his loneliness. But because of the structure, I also found it rather difficult to root for him at the same time.
Was that sufficient character depth to make him an interesting and three-dimensional sympathetic character? Because for me it kind of felt like a narrative device, like a contrivance, just to give some sort of reason for the story.
Yeah, in a way I think it was just enough to make me sympathetic towards him. But I also wish that it had been developed even further. Now we didn't get sort of a round character. It fell a bit flat.
To me, it felt as if the character was very much secondary to the desire to write a book. And it was almost as if the author was thinking to himself, well, I want to write a book. I suppose I'd better come up with a character. And I suppose I'd better give that character some sort of motivation. And annoyingly, there was a secondary character, Sheila, who was really interesting, who did have an interesting backstory and had lots of stuff. I mean, if the whole story had been about Sheila, I would have been riveted. It's kind of like we're taunted with this character, and then we have to go back to Jake and what to me was quite a boring and mundane murder mystery story with a kind of cookie cutter motive for the murder, and essentially just a very long road trip of him on the run. The whole book basically is Jake on the run from the law after murdering someone.
Yeah,
and
at least the first part.
The first part. But then suddenly, for reasons that I will avoid spoilers with, in part 2, we focus on Sheila, and the whole book just became interesting. And I enjoyed part 2, but I'd already built up a certain amount of resentment after part 1. But also the annoying descriptions. 2 rooms, earth floor, hardly any furniture, bed sheets made from scraps of old clothes, cold, near starvation, carrying water from the well. This is not how to tell a story.
Yeah, he gives us these sort of little images, but then he doesn't do anything with them. Like, that's a lazy writing.
You and I watched Jess Owens completely slating the Farseer trilogy.
Yeah.
And what she seemed to dislike about it was exactly what you and I like when we read fantasy, which is an author who takes their time to describe the environment and do the world building and create an atmosphere in their writing. And it's kind of long-winded, and she kept saying how long-winded it was, and it drove her crazy. And to a certain extent...
she found it boring, whereas I found that totally engaging and entertaining. And what she found boring in the Farseer books, I found entertaining and engaging, and those bits made me want to read even further to see what happens, and I think they were essential to the story. And I also find it funny that Royal Assassin, I just called the best sequel I've read so far this year, whereas she totally butchered that book and said it was the most disappointing thing she's read the entire year.
Stags was written for readers who get bored by lengthy descriptive prose.
This book showed a lot of promise in the beginning with its beautiful imagery and description that it had in the first few pages, but then with all that lists and the sort of jumping back and forth kind of time structure, that kind of ruined the story. It wasn't as effective as it could have been, and I think I would have preferred a more straightforward story.
You're absolutely right. It started off, the first couple of paragraphs, I can't actually remember where it went wrong, but it started off really well because you were with me when I read the first couple of paragraphs, and in fact I read it aloud, and we both got excited about it, didn't we? And I said immediately, I'm in, and you said something along the same lines
and that's
as well.
when we decided to do the body read, because we both liked the beginning.
Well, of course, because it starts off in the past tense as well. So it reads like a proper book. Jake and Edith followed the sheep trods up the side of the fell, moving through last year's bracken, frost-scorched a deep rust colour. They paused to catch their breaths, taking swigs from their water bottles, listening to the wheels of lapwing in the sky. Soon they made it up onto the rocky plateau. In the distance, the peaks of the Lake District. In the middle distance, the Howgill Fells. It feels like a proper book to begin with. And it's really interesting, and it's atmospheric, and it's got nice descriptions of the countryside, and it goes on and on. But I think his fatal error was making Jake his central character. If this had been a story about Sheila, the interesting character with the interesting history, observing Jake, but from Sheila's perspective, and the whole Jake story being told, but from Sheila's perspective, and with her emotional reactions to falling in love with him and being confused by that whole situation, and then everything that she discovers about him and his past, and that would have been an interesting book.
With multiple point of views, like this could have easily have been told from Sheila's point of view, the whole thing.
Sheila also provided a whole separate cast of side characters. There's her whole family and her friends and the people she works with, her neighbour. I mean, everything about the Sheila story has the elements that you need for a good, proper novel.
For example, this side character Bear, I think his name was.
Yeah.
I thought he was interesting. apparently he had some kind of a rougher background, probably some biker connection, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And then at an older age, he had become more softer and gentler guy, and I found that quite compelling, and I wanted to read more about him and Sheila, like how they get along.
And you get to observe a working class woman in the north of England trying to start a new life. That's an interesting story. And the relationship with her neighbour who dresses like a Viking and does historical reenactments. There's so much interesting meaty stuff on that bone. And it just felt like a terrible waste. But at the same time, it made part two infinitely more interesting to read, and it did keep me going until I eventually, with a certain amount of relief, got to the end. There are some good bits. That's another thing I wanted to talk about. This guy really understands grief. And in so many
grief and loneliness.
Yeah, and in so many places it could have really delved deep into that stuff and it would have been fascinating.
Although we've just been talking a lot about all the bad stuff that's wrong with the book. Like, there's lots to compliment about. Like for example, there's this scene where Jake is in his old house, if I remember right, and he goes into his son's room, and the loneliness is sort of it's almost overwhelming. Like there's no one there in the house anymore, and the son is not there, and he also imagines there's his wife there in the background somewhere, but of course she's not there, and the whole place feels so silent that the loneliness becomes even more overbearing.
There are some beautiful passages. Often he found himself standing outside William's bedroom door, a hand on the doorknob, feeling like he couldn't breathe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Give me more.
That's the kind of scene that I meant. There are many scenes or depictions in this book where the scene seems to reflect the moods of the character.
Yeah, atmospherically, the scenes reflect them. So the outside world is reflecting what's going on internally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's kind of cinematic in that respect.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
In fact, actually, this reads a lot like a screenplay or a script. All those lists are kind of like stage directions.
Yeah, like it was written with a film adaptation in mind.
Yes. Yeah, and it would probably be a very good film.
Yeah, probably.
I think it's our duty and our responsibility as professional book reviewers to give an honest thumbs up or thumbs down to this book. So, given the ranty nature of the review, there's only one way that we can do this, and I think we need to do a bit of magic.
All right. What's your idea? I'm all ears.
You bastard. That was so good. That was so good. And it completely threw me. Just do a thing or something and I'll make something happen. But you're going to need to do it again because I was talking over it. So, 1, 2, 3. Did we like this book? Wait for it. You've got to wait until I give you your cue. Okay. Serious face now. Business-like. Professional. People depend on us to know whether to read this or not. You're drooping. Okay, are you ready? Did we like this book? Ears up for yes, ears down for no.
So yeah, I didn't quite like the book.
And on that note, I think...
Yeah, I wasn't exactly jumping with excitement.
Thank you. Thank you for being a guest on my channel. I hope you will come back. I hope it wasn't too excruciating for you.
It was a pleasure, and I will gladly buddy read with you again.
And on that note, I think I'll call it a day. Thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you haven't already, you know what to do. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share, comment, do all the good stuff, and I will see you next time. See you later.